holy cow, this is our anniversary, Renee. Happy anniversary. 1 year of podcasting.
That's amazing. I never thought we'd be here. Can't believe we've made it a whole year. That's amazing.
It is actually a small miracle because if you'll recall, I said that I'll never do podcasting. And here we are a year into it. 50,
Yeah.
how many? This is the year
51
episode
today. 51.
51. We're celebrating. How did that happen?
Well, it is a fun story if you want to talk about why we have a podcast, kind of the origin story, if you will. But you and I have talked on stages together now for what, 4 years, I would think, if
I
not
think
longer.
so.
Through the
Yep.
pandemic, we really started to hit our stride talking about working with COVID Recovery Iowa back then and then Project Recovery Iowa. So that's when it all started. And every time we'd leave the stage, people would say, "Do you guys have a podcast?" And I'd say, "No, but I'd love to have one." And you'd say, "No, and I don't want to have one." And I guess I won. It's kind of how it worked.
I guess so. Well, because we go to all these conferences and everyone has a podcast. And so I kind of started to feel left out. And so kind of that FOMO hit me, I think. And then lo and behold, I bought a microphone and some headphones, and here we are, still podcasting.
So what is going on the farm this week while we start off our podcast series today?
Well, it's that time. So this is kind of farmer, kind of not, kind of something everybody has to do, right? There comes a time in your life when you realize we've had that bed too long. We talk about how important sleep is on this show. We talk about self-care, wellness, right? And how important sleep is. Well, the sleep number has gotten to start to show its age. And so although I do love to set my sleep number, it's not comfortable anymore. And so we've been on this adventure looking at beds. So I've been at all these stores, where you just jump from mattress to mattress. That one's too firm. This one's medium. This one's too soft.
Yes.
It's painful. And do you know that I added up the cost of my first 4 cars? And that I could have bought all of them for what a mattress costs today, Renee. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but farmers complain about things like how much stuff costs, and they're pretty thrifty. That's not the case when you're looking at some of the mattresses that Jennifer has told me that we're looking at for her back and other things. We're also that age, right? So we need some different,
Well, I'm on Jennifer's side on this, and I won because we had one that I literally got to a point where I'd sleep on it, it would hurt my back more, and I'd have to put like other things under the sheets to try to keep my back up, and it just, I don't know, it went from working to not working pretty quickly. What was really funny is Brent, when we bought one, he'd had a nagging back issue. And as soon as we bought a new mattress, that went away. And so he was thinking, "Oh no, the mattress." But I was like, "Man, we've had this one a really long time. We need a new one." Had the same conversation, but I'm telling you, once you do it, it's worth it. But it's kind of hard to pick. There's a lot of options.
Watch out for those things. Sometimes you take for granted, well, it's not the bed. Well, it could be, right? And so we talk about how to take care of yourself on, that's part of the reason we podcast, right? Kind of going back to why do we do this? Sometimes it's those obvious things. You need to make a change, and it's an investment, right? And so, I jokingly told Jennifer, this might be the last mattress we ever have to buy. So, make the investment in it now. It's supposed to last 35 years, right? So
you really lost your mind. You're only supposed to have one about 10 years per the research.
Well,
so I'll just tell you, you've lost your mind on that one.
I'm not spending this much every 10 years. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But
yet we'll buy fireworks with chickens and other ridiculousness. So
absolutely. That's a yearly tradition. So that's all how we take care of ourselves. So that's what's happening on the farm right now.
All right.
Well, today, getting ready for fall.
We're going to go through our top podcasts of the year. We've got we just appreciate our listeners out there. We've got folks that have tuned in every week, and we've got the top 5 of last year, and we're going to kind of walk through those and talk about like kind of an update on where we are on some of these topics as we go through our top 5. And then we're going to dive into some lessons learned. We learned a couple things while podcasting this year. I know you're shocked. When you do something for a whole year consistently, it's amazing. You grow and change. And I hope our podcasts are better today than when we started. And I don't even know if I could go back and listen to the first one because I'm sure it was so bad. And then the third segment we'll get into is kind of what's coming up next in the next year. So to kick us all off, Jason, let's talk about those top 5. And the very first episode we ever did is actually one of our top episodes. Our people really enjoyed it. And it was about from stigma to solutions, shifting the conversation on behavioral health. So, Jason, where are we today with stigma? Did we made a lot of progress in a year? What's going on?
I need to go back and re-listen to that episode because I can tell you stigma comes up at every conference. We talked last week, all the conferences we're going to where we're speaking at. That comes up every time, right? It's still such a prevalent issue. And we hear story after story of systems creating stigma, of policies creating stigma, like of all these unintended consequences that result in stigma, behavioral health, and substance use disorders. It's such a great conversation. I think we could probably we might do a prequel to that or a sequel. Which quel
It's
would
a
it be?
sequel if it's after. It's a prequel if you're doing it before that
So it's
topic.
probably a sequel, but a prequel sounds better. But we could probably do another one, just
Sure.
of the stuff we've learned since then, when it comes to stigma and how that's still such a relevant conversation, especially within healthcare.
I really appreciate the conversation around that when it's a policy that induces stigma. It's one thing for people to have their own mindsets and the way the culture is and the way people think and believe. But when you actually have put it into policy in such a way that it has induced stigma, we've really, really missed a boat on that one. And so there are times where you bump right into that and the policy makes it difficult for people to get the help they need. And so you've got to think about like maybe policies, processes, procedures. And I know in my own office, we're still continuing that hybrid work conversation to work remote, to be able to work in the office. And part of this is this, right? Being able to take flex time to be able to go to your therapy appointments, to be able to do things. And I want people to be able to feel comfortable doing that and not penalize people because they need extra supports and help, especially when it's around their mental health, because when they feel better, they work more, they're more productive, and they enjoy their job. And so mental health is just a foundational, important piece for all of us in the workplace. And if we aren't careful, we can make a policy that makes it too hard to get to appointments. And so I just know for my personal self, this is one that's ever ongoing. So I'd like to kind of circle back on it and maybe think about it from that workforce perspective about how to make sure that we're making it available to everyone.
And the other thing is how do we interpret policy, right? Because we've heard a lot of administration interpreting policy in a way that was never intended to be. And how do we then have conversations to those who interpret it in a way that takes it to a whole different level? And so, I think that's the other part of this that's really important to talk about. What's number 2 on our list, Renee?
Number 2 was actually episode 8, where we talked about empowering employees and unleashing the potential of their EAPs or their employee assistance programs in the workplace. So using the employee assistance program in the workplace, Jason, do you think we've made any progress in the year since we've talked about that?
Well, it's still a conversation I have all the time. And I'm shocked still. And I say this all the time. I'm still shocked, even though I do this all the time, the resistance of even doing training as part of an EAP program. It's overwhelming. I'm working with a large city right now, and there's resistance of training a segment of their staff because it's stigma. It's all the things we just talked about. And so, why aren't we embracing those EAP solutions? Why aren't we leading people to coaching and counseling and financial counseling, all the things that come with EAPs? I don't know why there's still resistance, Renee. What are you seeing?
Yeah. So in the workplace for us at the end of the fiscal year, they came out another brochure to the whole office. There was one from management about how to help manage employees. I actually learned something. I did not know this, but as a leader of my division, I actually have EAP program assistance for me as a manager where I could get free assistance to think about how to manage or handle a more difficult issue in the office. I didn't even know that was a thing. And here I am talking EAP all the time. I knew about the personal options for my own personal use if I wanted to use the AP, but I had not one idea that there was another level for management. So shame on me that I didn't even figure that out. But at the end of that fiscal year, making sure that I reiterate that to all the people in the office and making sure that it's part of, I do a weekly update as part of my communication plan. And in it was one of the points that said, hey, this came out this week. It was sent to you. I'm reattaching it, but here's the number. Here's these are free benefits available to you with or without the insurance. And hoping that people know that it's trying to make it a more okay conversation to have in the workplace than rather than bearing it. But you're right, it's still an issue.
And I know, I think about those mental health awareness trainings of just how valuable it is to train managers and staff across the board, right? Not just those focused activities like the counseling and the coaching, but looking at how do we train everyone just to be better able to identify, to be more open in the conversation. So hopefully those other things are utilized. And there's still so much opportunity to do more training and invest in employees. I know trainings take time, right? You got to take people away from their duties and have them focus on a training. It takes time, it takes energy, all of those things, but it pays itself back. And so many employers just aren't able to see that long-term value of supporting their workforce. And it's unfortunate because they pay the price in turnover, and not being able to recruit people and then
Yeah.
complain they don't have staff.
Right.
And
Right.
so either you invest early, and create that healthy culture and
Mhm.
workforce, or you complain.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot of people that complain and aren't doing the things they need to do up front.
Yeah. I agree with that. All right. So number 3 is beyond the pandemic, rebuilding connections in rural communities. And this was back all the way back to episode 3. This is a really big deal. When we started talking about the pandemic, a year ago, we were 3 years in, now we're 4 years in from the event that happened around the world, we call it now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's still residual effects of that, Jason. I know it's not, everybody thinks we're quote back to normal. And that's not actually what we're seeing. So let's talk about that. So how are these connections being rebuilt in the community, and where could we
Well,
grow?
I mean, I think it's interesting because we've also talked about isolation a lot. And so we know isolation continues to be prevalent. And really, that's just an ongoing, that's really what we're talking about here is we're continuing to be more isolated and we're struggling to rebuild some of those connections in
Yep.
rural places. And a lot of folks are struggling to reconnect after the great disconnect. And so I think that's part of the conversation is it's different today, and there's actually a certain level of having to reteach people how to connect. Some of the
Mhm.
projects we've done, we've actually physically had to get people back into the rhythm of meeting in person again, of building
Mhm.
relationships with each other. And we're talking about CEOs and executives that we're reteaching these
Mhm.
skills to. And it's actually developing healthier organizations because we see when the top is re-engaging, then we see all of their employees under them also then saying, oh, wait, maybe I should be going out and having coffee and getting to know that organization over there better than I do, because maybe that would help us to work together. Those are skills that have to be retaught. And I'm not sure that's always on our radar screen, that we actually have to reteach those skills in
Yeah.
every level of our
Yeah.
staff.
Yep. In our office, we're actually doing a plan right now, not only for training, which was about what you were just talking about for number 2, but also traveling to some of our key community partners. And there's never been an outreach effort for that, which makes no sense because they're community partners. And the word partner means that you should know them and they should know you
Right.
would think. And so that's part of this next training round, is to take the time, and it is time consuming, for me to get to all of our institutions and all of our districts. It's almost every other week for a full calendar year. So you're like about 24 trips around the state off the top. So if I add in community partners, trying to get those nearby, that's an additional day or additional time. So it is a time commitment. But if we're really going to truly partner and work together with some folks that have really high needs in mental health and substance use, which is the folks that I work with these community partners on, coming out of the prison system and reentering society, and they have high level needs, we've got to be better partners with them so that they can say to us, hey, we don't think that person's going to fit, or hey, that person's not going to make it here, or so that we set them up for success and not set them up for failure. So it's a really big endeavor that we're trying to step into, but it's kind of in the never been done before situation. So it would be interesting to see a year from now how much progress has been made in this one. All right, so number 4 was episode 10, where we talked about mobile crisis response and how it should work. We got a lot of feedback on this, Jason. It doesn't work. So
And
talk about mobile crisis. What's
and
supposed to
this
be
was an
happening?
early on. And this was
Yeah.
an early on episode.
Yeah.
And I think we're in the same place we were then. I know we are in our home state where, we're looking at a complete redesign and we don't know what it's going to look like. We've been in other states recently and it's not doing too much better there because there's ambiguity of how it's going to be built out. There's ambiguity about how does this occur in rural areas as opposed to sometimes more successful in urban areas. Brett and I were actually just at a focus group, and the conversation came up again about the different models. Whether there's some
Oh,
people embedded in law enforcement communities that is very successful, but it's not mobile crisis, but it's like mobile crisis. And so, having conversations around we don't want to lose this because it works, and so how do we have kind of the ability to do both it's a hot topic, right? It's still a hot topic, and it's a conversation we need to continue to be having. And I think probably for as long as we want to have a podcast, we could go back to this one and do it over again, because it's the same conversation. And as we learn more, we kind of understand what works in different areas. But at the end of the day, I think we have to be more flexible. We talk about policy, and one of the big things we do in states is like, how do we make sure there's equitable access across the state? Mobile crisis is a tough one because it needs to look different depending on rural areas or urban areas. And so we have to figure out the flexibility, but not lose equitable care and access. It's a hard one, Renee. I don't know how we're going to fix it.
I just had an interesting thought, and I didn't even run this past you, but wouldn't it be interesting to do a series on this and have interviews on all the 4 different types that we have in the state, and let them all tell us the pros and cons of their version, and then we could kind of dive into that, because we do have different versions. And where my brain connects to this conversation is where we've talked about workforce and misusing the wrong type of person in the wrong space.
Yep.
And some of these are using licensed individuals in a way that shouldn't be used. And so we're strapped for licensed individuals who can counsel and train, and yet we're using them on the front lines of something that shouldn't be that way. So maybe an interview series of this might be an interesting conversation.
That's a good idea. I think I see something coming in the future. So
yeah, because we were talking, in a minute, we're going to talk about what's the plans for the future, and more interviews are part of it. But I think that could be a series we could easily tie in and kind of get everybody's perspective, because the funny part to what you just said, and it's true, is people are really sold on their version of whatever it is. And so they're going to be a lot of pros in their minds on that. But we know, like, there's one of those programs, I won't name names, but it's basically a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday program,
right,
which is not at all when people have crisis. I don't know about
right.
you, Jason, but crisis doesn't happen often between 9 and 5. So that doesn't seem to make sense to me, but I'm sure in their mind, it makes a lot of sense.
I'm sure it does. And, that's just the easy way to do it. But that's not real. It's not when people, it's not when you need to be responding, right? I remember doing it, right? I remember it was Friday night at midnight and I'd be out, with an officer responding. And so, it's certainly one of those things that I think there's going to be a lot more conversation about it, and there's no easy answer.
No easy answer. All right. So the 5th most popular for the year, top recordings of the year, is Uncovering the Hidden Struggles, Navigating Mental Health Resources in Rural America. Wow, navigating rural resources. Jason, how have we made progress in the last year on navigating rural resources?
Well, boy, I like the term navigating, because the first thing in some of the conferences we go to is like, well, we just need another resource manual. And if I ever hear someone say we need another resource manual, my head starts to explode a little bit. And so literally I keep some duct tape in my backpack so I can just start wrapping my head up so it doesn't explode when I hear we need another resource guide, because we absolutely don't need another resource guide to navigate. What we need to do is either leverage what we have, or we need to be making those community connections, because it's really up to the communities to know communities best and to work together and partner and get things done. And so oftentimes we have communities, small communities, they don't know what's going on across the street from them. I go to Critical Access Hospital, and there's a behavioral health agency across the street, and they've never spoken to each other, yet they share same patients going through the emergency department. And so when we talk about multi-visit patients going through EDs, generally, they have a mental health condition. They're showing up for help. They don't know what they need, and there's not coordinated care. And so this is my soapbox, Renee. You shouldn't have gotten me started on it.
Yeah. I also think about navigating, and that kind of goes back to why we named the podcast what we did with stepping in it. Because, man, there's a bunch of piles of garbage when you start navigating the system in rural communities. There's all these pockets of just garbage where there's personality involvement, so that's why they don't speak, or there's redundancies because everybody wants to do the exact same service, so nobody will branch out and do the stuff that they don't have, on and on and on. And so you're right, it is really an entertaining conversation. About the resource manual, man, I'm in a project currently trying to help with our folks reentering, and there is the 95-page research manual or resource manual from 2021. Do you know how much the world has changed since 2021? Yep. And in the resource manual includes everything at HHS, which is 100% not the same as it was in 2021. Right. And so it's like, that's what we have to work on. And everybody says, if I say, well, I want to work currently on the connections, meeting the partners, what we just talked about. And they're like, oh, but we have this research manual. And so then I get it. And it's, yeah. So I don't even think that probably at least a quarter, if not a third of the people listed in the manual may not even still exist since the manual was created, and nobody has bothered to check it. So it's another one of those conversations that we've had where you have the list, it's all tattered and torn, and nobody even knows if there's somebody that answers the phone if you call the number. And so I think that we still have struggles. Okay, so now the next segment we're going to chat about is lessons learned while podcasting, because we are not professional podcasters. This could be.
We've been doing this for a year. I think we now can call ourselves professionals. No,
I don't know, because we still crash into stuff that makes.
Is there a definition for what it means to be a professional podcaster?
Probably somebody not us. Probably just not us. If it's a picture of us in the dictionary, the opposite people would be the professionals. So name a podcast lesson, Jason. We've got a few that we've learned. And
this is random, but we might need to update your Wikipedia page, Renee, that you now host this podcast. I'm just throwing that out there. I think
we've tried, and this is a side note, but I think Molly has tried to update my Wikipedia page, and it doesn't let her do so. And we haven't figured out why, because I'm stuck in like at least a decade ago when I was a legislator, and can't get it moved past that.
At least you have a Wikipedia page. Like I'm not even professional enough
but my current appointment can't be added, nor can any of the other things be added. It's a very strange world. I don't understand, but you can chat with her. She was really ticked off about it several times.
Well, what else? So there's a lesson learned, right? There's so many things we've learned. Probably the biggest thing we learned is we did attempt, and we're going to continue to do remote podcasting, right? And so I can't tell you how much I enjoyed sitting in the lobby of a hotel and watching everything around me while we focused on a podcast. It was probably one of the best days ever.
I can just tell everybody in the audience, if you've got somebody with some attention issues, maybe the lobby's not the best place because they get distracted. But I'm just not naming names, but there's some distractions that occur in a lobby.
Especially when there's lots of coffee, and you have a lot of coffee in the morning as you're doing the podcast.
But what was the highlight though, Jason? I mean, there was a highlight. Remember the guy that came up and chatted with you at the conference? I mean, come on, there are some highlights of being in the lobby.
I've forgotten the story now.
You do too. Remember, there's a guy that came up to you talking about how we were the ones podcasting and something about being professional and whatnot. And we're just laughing.
He thought we were professionals. I know. He's like, I saw you podcasting today. That was very impressive. Like, oh yeah. Which I think that was the day we had the mics like at different levels. We had to redo that podcast.
We had to redo everything. We don't even tell people how bad the bad sides are. Good thing we don't do like the blooper reel, because that would be a mess. We have some bad stuff. Let's just hope that stays in the vault.
All right. So that goes to the next one, right? Microphones, right? We've learned a lot about mics. We've been through a couple iterations. We have electronic mixers now on my laptop. And we're matching up mics. Part of it was we had two different mics, and that caused some issues when it came to electronic mixing and making sure our sound levels were at the same. And so really, we're looking at audio quality.
This shows the professionalism in which we create this podcast. I mean, we don't even know what we don't know, and we're crashing into it going, well, this worked until it didn't. My microphone was awesome as long as it was just me. But then once you start mixing and starting adding people, and then I think, Jason, because we want to do remote, you were talking about even other microphones that we could own and purchase to be more on the road. And this could get really out of hand, folks. But
we're looking at remote wireless microphones that we could walk around. We could do this in the car. There's so many options. I just got to get the budget approval for Real Policy Partners to pitch in for all of this equipment that I can certainly outfit us with, Renee.
Yeah. And so this is for a peek of what this could have entailed, folks. As we told you, we were in South Dakota, but I don't know, we did tell you about where we went in South Dakota, but there could have been a podcast in Blue Earth, Minnesota at the Jolly Green Giant. And there could have definitely been a podcast done at the Corn Palace in Mitchell, South Dakota. So those are just two brilliant ideas. Oh, wait, there could have been a third one at that fabulous structure park on the side of the highway at whatever exit that was. So see, we already have these great ideas, folks. So just look out. And when Jason
174, exit 174 on I-90 in South Dakota. And I think if you're not a newsletter subscriber, you need to get online and subscribe to our newsletter, because you will see pictures of Renee and I at the Corn Palace if you subscribe to the newsletter. And so, that's something else we learned, right? Was have a newsletter, connect the newsletter to the podcast. Really talk about, get feedback into what we're going to talk about next. And so, I think a newsletter was something else that we learned while podcasting, is how can we better promote that? And the other thing we learned was YouTube. I think, and I know when I listen to podcasts, sometimes my wife and I were listening to a podcast in the car the other day, and I'm like, I wanted to know what the person looked like. Because I'm kind of visual. And so I'm like, is there a YouTube? I'm like, is there a video of this podcast? Because I want to see it. And so we've really seen a lot of people listening on YouTube. And so, I think that there really is something to the visual part of it, that the audio is great, but a lot of folks really need to see the rest of it, right? Only 7% of the words that you use. 93% is what you look like, what you see, how you take that in. And so really thinking about all of those things are important just to get more listeners.
And from that perspective, I also really appreciate the closed caption, because I can't always have the sound up. And so I can watch videos, but read the videos if I can't always have the sound up wherever I am. So I appreciate all of that technology and getting better at like using our transcripts and things. And I know behind the scenes, our team is working really hard on that. And the other piece we're looking at, because it's been really fun and a new addition, is having guests. We just started our first couple of guests here at the end of our first year, and those have gone really well. So I don't know if we have other ideas in the hopper for guests. I know we just talked about it a while ago with Mobile Crisis, maybe bringing in some folks there. But I think guests could really be more interesting, especially letting them tell us their perspective on the rural health of our country. And I think it'll be good.
Absolutely. I look forward to having more guests on here. I'm talking to folks about coming on. And so I'm really excited with some of the guests we have upcoming, and I think we're always looking for guests who have our same, mentality, want to talk about health in rural areas. And so I think that's awesome. And with that comes the other part that's kind of the struggle for me, is keeping up on all this. Renee, how do we keep up on making sure that we have an episode ready to go every week? Because this is kind of a commitment. And that was part of the reason I said I'm never doing a podcast, is because it sets an expectation. And when you have an expectation set, you have to fulfill your obligation. And it's kind of, when you think about it, like every week, you got to have 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And you got to be planning ahead, which might be the bigger issue for me, is looking ahead and making sure you have something that's ready to go every week, which means it has to get to Molly, 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. So there's actually a lot of logistics involved in maintaining a podcast for a whole year. Yeah. Tell us about, how did you set that up?
Yeah.
Because we know I didn't, right? We know I had nothing to do with the logistics.
Because we just learned, and this is another thing you learned, the part you like is talking. That's the part you learned, and that's your gift. And so the podcast portion, if only you have to do this, is great. You're like, fine, I can do that part. But had I said, Jason, you have to get this online or write the transcript or do all this, it never would have happened. So the really cool part really for both of us is we have an awesome team, and our team does all of it. Really, truly. We do create the content. We do think about what we're going to talk about in advance. And that, I guess I could say,
most of the time,
we have a general idea where we're going, but it is more of that part. It has to be done in advance. But yeah, the biggest piece of it is just keeping it on the calendar and keep pushing. And so trying to be at this point a month ahead, so that we can always, if things happen in our world with the two of us. I think, Jason, though, this is going to get easier once we start figuring out how to do this on the road, because you and I end up on the road together a lot.
Right.
And sometimes there's extra time on the road at those conferences where we're there to do our key part at one or two parts of that day, but yet we're there for so many hours. So I think if we're going to continue to improve our process, I think, because once we get sound that works and it can work on the road, then I think we'll have an ability to, because it has been difficult with my work and your work to make sure that we get on the same days and times where we can actually do this. And so you're right. It is a commitment, but I think it's finally starting to pay off. It's a lot of fun to see people at the end of our speaking engagements when we have the QR code up on the screen, pull out their
Mhm.
phones to take a picture so that they can to find us. And I think that's a lot of fun. So I know after the last 2 or 3, speaking of we have more listeners than we've had before because
Absolutely.
we've got people that are joining us. So that's pretty fun. All right.
And I
So
do want to just give kudos out to our team again, because
oh
I
my
think the
goodness, that's
biggest
so
part of a
amazing.
successful podcast is the behind the scenes folks that edit, put it together, get it to all the places it gets posted, and takes care of all the things, right? Making the YouTube shorts. All of that is an essential part of having a podcast. And when you have a team that is really skilled at that, it makes
Yeah.
all the difference in the world, because you're right, Renee, those details, never going to do it. I could do
No,
it. I
but
would be miserable doing it. And
right.
so I
So our
think it's,
listeners, though, what we go back about 3 episodes, you had Molly as a guest
yeah.
talking about strategic planning, and Molly really is the integrator, and she is the
Mhm.
person that makes this happen for us. And so for me, I wanted one of these for years, but I didn't have that. And so I knew enough about myself to know that I wouldn't be able to get all those details done. So I had to build the infrastructure before
Mhm.
I could start the podcast. And so it's been just an amazing partnership. And Lindsay does such a great job too, just
Yep.
making sure that we get promoted. And so, yeah, we wouldn't be here without the whole team. That for sure wouldn't work out
Right.
because I don't think either one of us know what we're doing most of the time. So
Nope.
who are
That's the
we getting? Who
biggest
are we
lesson
getting?
learned right there. You
Right
got to
there.
have the team.
Gotta have a team.
All right. What's coming, Renee?
The easy one is going to be more guests. And now that we've laid the foundation, our first year really talking about what the behavioral health should look like. If you're new to joining our podcast, year 1 was a lot about the foundation. It was really about, what should a vision be for a behavioral health system, kind of the pitfalls we've seen along the way, places where we could improve it, and really talking about, we did some long series on like all the different levels of care that should be part of the series, and what should be part of that system. So that whole foundation. But now that we've sort of set the foundation, we want to bring in folks who work and live in that foundation in those different pieces to talk about like their perspective on where how's it going, and then like where they like to go in the future with improving rural. And we know some really awesome folks. And as we travel, we meet even more fun people that
Right.
are interested in joining us here. So more guests is going to be step 1. What else, Jason's coming in the next year?
Well, we're of course going to do more about workplace. I think a lot of a lot of the speaking I do, a lot of the trainings I do, I'm doing more and more stuff in workplaces, so I think that becomes again top of mind as we think about emotional well-being in the workplace. We think about
Mhm.
employee retention. We're
Mhm.
going to talk more about workplace policies, workplace procedures, workplace training programs, and how you can advocate better in your own workplace, right?
Mhm.
Really personalizing that. As I know we're going to talk more about that. I also know we're going to talk a lot more about criminal justice stuff, because that's another area we're doing a lot of work. Renee, your job right now, you do a lot of that. We're
Mhm.
finishing up some big projects right now where we're really embedded in looking at criminal justice and those criminal justice commitment, competency, restoration, all of those areas really cross over. And so, I haven't, I have to say in my career, had a deep dive into that other side, right? That if we're talking about a zero intercept model, law enforcement and jails have really become that treatment facility by default, because there's nowhere else. The right levels of care don't exist, especially in rural areas. And so that's really the basis of where we need to look at intervening as we move forward.
Yeah. And I know one other series that we're going to do more of a deep dive in is just substance use. We've talked about it some as far as ASAM and levels of care, but not really about the substances themselves and the impact each type of substance is having on our community. We've done a deeper dive on alcohol before, but really talking about some of those other drugs, and that intersects with the criminal justice system in such a
Right.
big way. I was just chatting with somebody else again, and I'm thinking 95% of my folks in my system are either intercept with mental health or substance use, and sometimes both. And none of that makes it easy for reentry. None of that makes it easy for them to, get stable and maintain jobs and employment and go back to being a functioning taxpayer. And that's a real struggle. So that whole concept of not just the criminal justice system, but like you said, how it ties in on that recovery side and helping people and rehabilitation, making sure that people can get what they need so that they don't end up in the system. And then on the prevention side, I'd love to strengthen that more with more mental health courts and drug courts. And so people don't end up in the system, because we get some folks in there that we're like, how in the world are they incarcerated? But with the illness that they have, but you can see them with the illness and then be like, okay, they're so sick that they've made some choices that they may not even be aware that they've made. And now here they are in this system, which isn't really designed to care for them. So it'll be an interesting conversation. So Jason, what else do you think we want to talk about this next year?
Well, I think we want to hear more from listeners, right? We want to hear more about, what do you want to hear about? What areas do you think we should be talking about? Or if you have ideas of who we should interview, we're totally open to hearing from you. And so you can always find us. I think our emails are listed. You can go to our website and fill out a form and send it to us, and we will be able then to maybe make some content that's more focused around what you would like to hear as our listeners. Because I've been to a few places now, and people say, "Hey, I listen to your podcast regularly," and I'm like, "All right, that's awesome. So, what would you like to hear? How can we better make this useful content that you can learn from?"
That's right. And we'd like it to be things that not only you'd listen to that you think is fun and enjoyable for yourself, but if we can get content that's useful to you, you could use it in your workplaces or send it on to a team member or somebody that you also think could benefit from it, because it becomes then a free resource for you that we've put into it, but it's something that you can use hopefully for the betterment for you and helping other people understand how things work.
And if you're scared to do your own podcast, or you have a company that wants to do a limited series edition podcast, we can do that for you, right? We've been sponsored by other organizations to do podcasts for them. And so they hire us to do a 3 or 5 podcast series that's specific around talking about what they want us to talk about. And so when we think about behavioral health, mental health awareness training in businesses or a healthcare institution, there might be something we could do that could benefit you. And so that's also something that we can kind of bring to the table and have conversations about.
Yeah. So today's recovering politician self-care policy of the week, it's pool time, everybody. If you're a person like me that really, really loves the outdoor pool, I have to take advantage of that. You start thinking about where I am now. There's not that many weeks left of outdoor pool time in the Midwest. Now, if I lived elsewhere, this would not be an issue. But because I'm in the Midwest, pool time ends sooner than you'd like it to. So it's, a lot of people think, oh, you're past the 4th of July, summer's over, the fair is going to be right around the corner. Well, yeah, but it's also outdoor pool time. So it's like, if that's a big thing for you, enjoying that outdoor activities, outdoor sun, biking, whatever the things are, because unfortunately it gets to harvest time soon and then colder weather than we'd like. And none of us can be outside the way we'd like to in the Midwest. And so I'm just saying, remember, right now is the time that all the things you've been waiting for all year long, it's the time to get out and enjoy the sunshine and the warm temperatures, to do all those things that you hope to do before it gets back into your winter routine where we're all isolated and cold indoors. So Jason, any thoughts on what you'd like to do with the rest of your summer?
Well, get out. It has been a rough summer. Flooding across the Midwest has cut into some boating time this summer. So I've got to carve out, so it's travel, right? And so I've got to carve out some time and kind of get back to some of those things that I generally do. And even though, it's been good, it's been a summer of doing other things too, but, prioritizing. Family time and outside time, getting the boat in the water a few times here before it gets too cold. I know when you're talking about that, I'm like, oh, the summer is slipping away, and I know I haven't been out on a jet ski yet either. So, just a few things
right now, because there's some.
Well, I know we're really
other things in some of those water channels that could get yourself hurt. So you got to be smart with some of the. We just have so much water this summer. Who'd have thought that was all coming? But it's so much water that you got to be careful in the lakes and the streams, because it's a little more dangerous this year. So, but you're right, you don't have that much time left. So today we talked about our annual anniversary. So Jason, you want to don your hat for your anniversary? I'm putting on all my lights, my Christmas lights. I've got my beads. I am all prepared. It's our anniversary, everybody. And we're so excited to have been here with you for a full year. I can't say that I'm wearing this very long, but I'm very grateful for each of every one of you that have listened. So today we talked about those top 5 that have been the most interesting, according to our listeners. And we're thankful for all of you that voted and listened. You voted by listening. Oh my goodness, I didn't even know this one was a thing. We've got an even special bigger hat for our anniversary coming with Jason.
Happy anniversary, Renee. It's fantastic that we're celebrating 1 year of the podcast, and I can't wait. We're going to do this for another year. Is that what we're announcing? today.
going to continue on. I can't promise for how long, but we're going to keep going. So thanks to all our listeners. Have a great day, everybody.